tell, do you see the road? I'm out to my soul into the size. Whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect, you do it. All of that green together, the truth, yeah. When I tell you the
Hello and welcome back to Cypherfics, guys. We are happy to have you back with us today in part 6 of What If Harry Potter Meets the Power Rangers. Make sure to like, share, subscribe and also press the bell icon so that you never miss a great update. Also make sure to check out the wonderful author 10star12 on FANFICTIONnet. Well, let's continue with the story now.
The end of the year, however, brought yet more heartache to Harry's life. I woke from the vision with a mad plan. I was prepared to charge to London myself to try and save Sirius from Voldemort, but Hermione managed to convince me to do at least a little bit of checking first. Unfortunately for me, what checking we did only made me more determined to go. So, along with Hermione, Ron, Neville, Ginny, and Luna, I flew to London on some thestrals, a kind of magical horse-like creature, and traveled through the Ministry of Magic and down to the Hall of Prophecy. Once we got there, it became all too apparent that it was a trap. Especially once the Death Eaters stepped out of hiding and tried to order me to hand over one specific prophecy orb. Apparently they couldn't take it themselves or risk running afoul of the magical protections. Harry found himself choked up at this point. Even after so many years, the battle that followed and its ultimate end were still difficult for him to speak of. Finally, Trini leaned forward and placed a comforting hand on his knee. Looking up into her eyes, Harry couldn't help but return the reassuring smile she wore, if only slightly. After a few more moments, Harry was able to gather himself enough to continue, telling the Rangers about the ill-fated battle in the Department of Mysteries. How each of his friends was injured, nearly killed in a few cases, all because they decided to follow him on a fool's errand. How the Order had arrived to help at the last minute and how Sirius had been killed during the fight, the sole casualty on either side. Haltingly, he spoke of his anger as he chased after Sirius's murderer, Bellatrix Lestrange, and how he tried to finish her in his rage. He spoke of Voldemort's arrival and the awe he felt at watching the duel between the Dark Lord and Dumbledore. He spoke of Dumbledore's reveal of the prophecy that the Death Eaters had been after and what it meant for Harry and the wizarding world in general. Either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Harry intoned solemnly. Those words define my life, for I never really got to live my life until after the war was over. He snorted slightly before letting out a few self-depreciating chuckles. Hell, even after it was over, I only really got a month or so to try and get myself together before everything fell apart again. The Rangers exchanged looks, worry and confusion in their eyes as they did so until Harry pulled himself together again. He told them of his 6th year at Hogwarts and how Dumbledore finally decided to tell him of his theory as to how Voldemort had survived. He told them of Dumbledore's lessons on the history of Tom Riddle and how he believed it would help lead them to these Horcruxes. He spoke of how he had insisted that they burn through the memories Dumbledore had gathered in a single week before all but demanding that Dumbledore start teaching him something useful. I pointed out that if he expected me to be able to beat Voldemort, I could hardly beat his 50-plus years of magical experience with a typical Hogwarts education. It took some doing, but Dumbledore finally agreed to start with some more advanced tuition. He brought in Moody, making extra sure it was the real one this time, along with Shacklebolt when he was available, and a few other Order members on rotation, and they trained me in combat magics as best they could along with my wandless magic skills and whatever tactical knowledge I could gain. I spent the rest of my 6th year training under them while Voldemort, now ousted to the public, restarted his campaign to take over magical Britain. The lessons continued, though in a lesser form, when I went back to the Dursleys before my 7th year. On my 17th birthday, the protections on the house failed and the Order managed to ambush and capture over a dozen Death Eaters that tried to capitalize on it. Unfortunately for them, the Dursleys had left more than a month before and I had been moved to a safe house shortly afterwards. The only way that it could have gone better for us is if the Death Eaters hadn't been broken out of the Ministry's new prison less than a week later when Voldemort raided the facility. Harry shook his head once more before looking at each of the Rangers sadly. There was so much of that war that could have been prevented but for the stupidity and lack of action on the part of the Ministry of Magic. Amelia Bones, the head of the DMLE, was a good woman, probably one of the best we could have had in that position, but even before she was killed she was handicapped by the minister and his senior undersecretary, a vile woman named Dolores Umbridge. The same woman, by the way, who was most directly responsible for my arrest, imprisonment, and execution order after the war was over. The silence that followed lasted only a moment before Harry once more gathered himself and pushed on through his tale. He spoke of his 7th year at Hogwarts and how he had to be convinced by his friends and the Order members to actually attend. Harry had been convinced that his time would be better spent fully preparing himself for the fight to come, but ultimately he went to the school. His training had continued alongside his schoolwork and regular meetings with Dumbledore. These meetings largely consisted of discussions with the elderly headmaster, but as the year progressed they became more and more about dueling practice. The headmaster may have looked old, but he was still more than a match for the much more energetic and mobile Harry. The sheer number of spells that Harry's massive magical reserves allowed him to put out were balanced by Dumbledore's experience and spell knowledge, not to mention boosted by the power of the Elder Wand. "You mean the same Elder Wand that Rita has right now?" Zack asked. Harry nodded. "One and the same. As you all know, with the possible exception of Tommy, it is an artifact of tremendous power that amplifies the power of spells cast through it several times over. Dumbledore had won it from an old friend of his turned Dark Lord that he defeated in his younger days. He kept it safe throughout his life and its allegiance stayed with him until the day I managed to disarm him in a duel a few months after I graduated from Hogwarts. DMN near knocked him arse over teakettle at the same time too." Harry chuckled slightly, remembering the shocked yet proud look on his old headmaster's face when Harry had bested him. They had had their differences throughout the time they had known each other, the problems with Dumbledore's ideology the least of them, but he still had a certain feeling of respect and camaraderie for the man. Once more bringing himself back to point, Harry continued. "So the Horcrux hunt had gone rather well. The diary I destroyed back in my second year turned out to be the first one Tom made, as I mentioned earlier. While Dumbledore was studying it, one of the Castle House elves made a passing comment on how it felt similar to the bad magic in the come-and-go room. This led Dumbledore to finding another of the Horcruxes within Hogwarts itself. Sometime during my 6th year, Dumbledore also took a few members of the Order with him to follow a lead to another one, but it turned out to be a fake. We later discovered the real Horcrux, a locket, in the house I inherited from my godfather. Apparently, Sirius's brother, Regulus, had been a Death Eater, but had a change of heart and stole the locket Horcrux before he was killed. The final free Horcrux was hidden in Gringotts Bank and the Order was able to negotiate with the goblins that ran it to destroy it in exchange for a sizable amount of money. The goblins wanted nothing to do with the war directly, but they understood just what it would mean should Voldemort really win. Even still, they weren't willing to do anything for free, especially when it was asked by a wizard." Harry paused again to collect his thoughts before continuing. "A few months after I disarmed Dumbledore, he asked me, along with Hermione and Ron who had also been receiving training with the Order, to accompany him on a mission to find another Horcrux. He believed this one to be in a shack that once belonged to Tom's maternal line. Since Parseltongue was a strong trait in that line, he thought that my ability to speak it would help out and wanted Ron and Hermione there to back me up if needed. We arrived at the shack and I managed to talk our way past an animated snake skeleton on the doorway. Dumbledore found the Horcrux, a ring, and we barely acted in time to stop him from putting it on. As it turned out, the stone on the ring was actually the Resurrection Stone, like the wand and my cloak. Dumbledore had been searching for it for most of his life and his own longing coupled with compulsions on the ring had handily overwhelmed him. So does that mean that you had all those Deathly Hallows at once then?" Billy asked suddenly. "Since you already had the cloak and your headmaster had the wand, once you acquired the stone that would mean you had the full set." Harry blinked for a moment before smiling slightly. "You know, I never really thought about it, but I suppose we did." Go figure, his expression quickly fell after a moment though. In any case, it didn't last long. When we went to leave, Voldemort was outside waiting for us. He commended us on tracking down one of his Horcruxes, but told us that we wouldn't be leaving there alive so it made little difference. Harry swallowed again, fighting back his tears as he remembered the events that followed. Dumbledore passed me the ring and advised me to look into the tale of the three brothers, a popular children's story, before he faced off against Tom. He held him off long enough for us to get away, and it cost him his life. Kimberly and Trini had tears streaming down their cheeks now at the sadness in Harry's voice while the boys looked decidedly uncomfortable. Harry, having been through it personally, was more readily able to hide the emotions, but it was still clear enough that he was feeling the pain of his mentor's loss all over again. Finally, Harry recovered enough to speak again. The months that followed were hard. Not only was the Order reeling from Dumbledore's death, but Voldemort apparently took it as a sign that the war was all but won. We were fairly certain that he had heard Dumbledore's last words to me and figured out just what wand he held, a thought that was confirmed during later confrontations with him when he bragged about it, and only took greater encouragement from it. I don't even know if he realized that we had destroyed nearly all his Horcruxes until I told him as much during our final fight. In any case, it was 6 months before Voldemort finally took over the Ministry of Magic. 6 months of training and missions. Of hard-fought battles and costly losses for both sides. Unfortunately, my friends and I spent more time training than anything else. Because of the prophecy in our comparative youth, the senior members of the order decided to keep us more in reserve, both because they didn't want us to have to fight and because I was, arguably, too important to risk on just any old mission because of my apparent destiny as the only one who could kill Voldemort. It was more frustrating than anything I've ever really had to do. Then, a few months after he took over the ministry, we got word that Tom had decided to do something absolutely, monstrously stupid. He was prepared to break the statute of secrecy and take his war to the Muggles. Hermione was the first to realize the implications of this. She knew and explained to the rest of us just what would happen if the non-magicals learned of a hidden society of magic users and their first public contact was in the form of a terrorist killing indiscriminately. Something like that could only result in total war and the ultimate genocide of magicals everywhere. The way Hermione put it, fear would drive the Muggles to respond with force, as all humans are often wont to do. Whether or not Voldemort understood this fact, his arrogance prevented him from realizing just what that force would have resulted in. The fact that our fears of the outcome were all but confirmed by Luna, who had more than a hint of seer's talent, meant that we had no other choice but to take him out before he made his move. Harry met each of their eyes again, stopping at last with Zordon, who gave him an encouraging nod, his eyes solemn in understanding. We had to move fast and strike hard. We gathered all the allies we had and raided the ministry building in the early hours of July the 9th, 1999. The Death Eaters on guard were overwhelmed easily and we got into the building only to find Voldemort and the rest of his followers waiting on us. I never figured out how he knew we were coming, but the fight that followed is still a blur at this point. I remember spending most of the battle facing off against Tom directly. I remember him taunting me about the Elder Wand and how I was powerless to stand against him so long as he had it. I distinctly remember his rage when one of the Order members managed to kill his familiar, which also happened to be what we thought was his last Horcrux. You thought? Billy asked. So he had another one. Everyone was leaning closer, save for Zordon, who couldn't for obvious reasons, as Harry built toward the obvious CLMX of his tail. The anticipation in the air was nearly tangible. Harry just nodded with a tiny wince. Yeah, though even he didn't know it. We didn't even find out until he hit me with another Avada Kedavra curse. I died, but instead of passing on, the tiny fragment of his soul that was housed in my scar and made me an accidental Horcrux was removed and I once more survived the unsurvivable killing curse. Harry gave a soft chuckle. I have to say that the look on his face when I stood back up again was more than a little satisfying. Apparently the entire battle had stopped when I went down, and seeing me climb back to my feet again both inspired my allies and horrified and demoralized the Death Eaters. Without the corrupting influence of Voldemort's scar tainting my magical signature, the Elder Wand flat out stopped working for Tom. From what I remember of Hermione's theory, the bit of his soul on my scar was all that let the wand even come close to working against me in the first place, since I had won the allegiance of the wand when I disarmed Dumbledore nearly a year beforehand. Once the soul fragment was gone, the wand just wouldn't work against me anymore. I took advantage of it and cast what I sincerely hope to be the only killing curse that will ever cross my lips, with intent to cast and finish the Second BLD War, and gained a new title, the Man Who Won. Harry sat back, having leaned forward as he spoke, and stretched slightly as the Rangers, Zordon, and Alpha seemed to process what he had told them. It was the robot though that broke the silence. And what happened after that, Harry? Your story still doesn't explain how you came to be with us today. And so Harry spoke of the month following the end of the war. Of how he tried to relax and recover, feeling peace for quite possibly the first time in his life, only to remain ignorant of the trouble brewing in the ministry. He told them of Dolores Umbridge's seizure of power and her ministerial decree for the prevention of megalomaniacal acts. He spoke of the betrayal by Ron that led to his arrest and the subsequent farce of a trial and sentencing. He choked up slightly as he spoke of Hedwig's murder and smiled in satisfaction at his own extraction of vengeance against all those who turned against him. He told them briefly of his conversation with Death and his ultimate arrival in their dimension, which lead directly into Rita and Golder ambushing him and stealing the wand, which then lead to their own first meeting. And that's how it was. Harry finished with a sigh and a smile. So, any questions? Harry was banking on the Rangers all being too overwhelmed to really have anything to ask. He himself was feeling a bit raw, having to remember his less than pleasant past, though he was nonetheless happy that he had taken the step to share it with his new allies and, dare he suggest it, friends. He should have known better though. Zack gave him a wicked smile, practically dripping with mischief, before speaking. There were a few details that you were a bit light on there, Harry. I could use some more info if you don't mind. Harry groaned while the other Rangers shot Zack looks of curiosity. I'm going to regret this. I can feel it. What do you want to know, Zack? Well, Zack started, the amusement in his eyes never fading. You mentioned the dance thing you had to go to in your 4th year and that you went with a classmate of yours. I got the feeling that nothing much came from that afterwards, but you can't expect us to believe that you spent all those years in a co-ed school and never had a single girlfriend, can you? Harry's face almost immediately went bright red. Ah well, you see, Zachar, that's a bit complicated. Seeing Harry on his proverbial back foot, Zach pressed on with a huge smile on his face. Oh? How so? At this point, Jason, Billy, and Tommy were smothering their laughter at the Magi Ranger's embarrassment while Kimberly and Trini looked interested, though not much less amused than the others. Alpha, probably sensing that the time for serious talk was all but over, turned back to one of the computer consoles while Zordon merely chuckled good-naturedly. Harry flinched slightly. Well, you see, I was more than a little famous, as I said. With the whole boy who lived thing, there were a few girls who were interested in me just for that, wasn't interested in fangirls. Harry knew he was rambling at this point, but his own embarrassment and the eager and amused faces before him kept him from stopping. On top of that was my general social awkwardness from being raised by the Dursleys and a few other complications. At this, Harry looked down and away from the others, closing his eyes tightly as his embarrassment fully overwhelmed him. After a moment, he shook his head violently and turned back to face Zach. And besides, Harry near shouted. If you hadn't picked it up, Zach. I was more than a little busy with fighting a freaking war. I didn't have a lot of extra time for dating and such with that on my plate. Zach waved one hand lazily in the air. Yeah. What about that Hermione chick? You mentioned her several times. Did you two have a thing going on? Harry's face slipped into a fond smile as he thought about his best friend. Hermione and I never dated. Were we close? Yes. Could we have ended up with a relationship? Maybe. I guess I'll never find out now, and those same complications still apply. Harry trailed off again and Zach once more sprang on the perceived opening. Just what kind of complications are you talking about here, Harry? Harry leveled a flat, irritated look at the Black Ranger before flicking his wand. Do me a favor and stop talking for a moment. Moving on, does anyone else have any questions? Preferably not questions about highly personal details of my private life. Zach tried to speak up again, to insist that he wasn't finished with his own line of questions, but found himself unable due to the silencing spell Harry had cast on him. If you're a good boy, I'll remove the spell before we leave here, all right? Harry told him, smirking slightly as the other Rangers laughed at their comrade while Zach just pouted, his eyes still twinkling with good humor. Seeing that none of the other Rangers seemed to have any further questions, Harry stood once more, stretching as he cautiously tested the strength of his legs and his sense of balance. Finding that he was able to remain vertical and stable, he offered his hands to the two ladies sitting before them to help them up. Well, as much fun as this is, I am exhausted. Kimberly smiled as she took his offered hand. Yeah, it probably is getting a bit late, isn't it? What do you mean? Trini asked as she too accepted Harry's help with a tiny blush, checking the time on her communicator as she stood. It's only a little after 5. Kimberly turned to face the other Rangers as she stretched. Maybe so, but I was lucky to get off with just a warning after getting home so late last night. I don't want to risk it by missing dinner today. After that, it was only a matter of minutes before the Rangers had all said their goodbyes and teleported back to Angel Grove. When Harry was the sole human left in the command center, he wished Alpha and Zordon a good night before heading to his room to turn in early. Getting the CRP kicked out of him and his first time using his new powers had wiped him out more than he had anticipated. Just as he reached his door, however, Zordon spoke. Thank you once again, Harry, for sharing that with us. I know it could not have been easy for you. Rest well, Magi Ranger, for once you have fully recovered I shall begin your tutelage in the morphing grid power you now wield. There is much for you to learn. Harry nodded his thanks, muffling a yawn as his body started to slow down, before making his way into his room and closing the door. He took only enough time to wave his wand, transfiguring his clothing into something more appropriate for sleeping in, before collapsing onto his cot, asleep almost before he was fully settled. Ready 1. Ready position. And punch 2. Right foot forward. Punch with right fist. Ki. Block 3. Right arm vertical. Punch 4. Right fist back to ready position. Punch with left fist. Back, and rise up and pivot on left foot, turn around and land in ready position. Ki. Step 6. Left foot forward. Punch with left fist. Block 7. Left arm vertical. Punch 8. Punch with right fist. Back 9. Right fist back. Pivot torso and place left palm on right fist. High block 10. Pivot back. Left forearm horizontal near forehead with right fist at ready position. Punch 11. Punch with right fist. Left arm back to ready position. Step up 12, and Rise up and pivot on left foot, turn around and land in ready position. Ki. It had hardly taken any time at all for Harry to get into the groove of Jason's karate class. Despite his initial misgivings, he actually found most of it to be rather interesting, if not exactly the easiest thing he had ever done from a physical standpoint. But if nothing else, Harry was used to hard work and sore muscles, so he managed to get by. It also didn't hurt that Rita had been completely silent in the 2 weeks and some change since Tommy had been freed from her control and joined the Rangers. Jason and the others had been more than happy with the downtime, taking the chance to relax a bit since they didn't have to worry about the struggle to save the Earth as much. For his part, Harry couldn't help feeling a bit jumpy as more and more time passed without any activity from her. After all this time and all he'd been through, Harry just didn't have the same naivete and innocence that the others did. Harry had joined the karate class a few days after Rita went quiet, on a Saturday, as that was when most of Jason's beginner classes were held. There had been a bit of a tense moment when it came time for Harry to pay for his place in the class. Since he had only had his job at the youth center for a bit over 2 weeks at that point, his first check was a bit short to cover all the necessary fees. The other Rangers had, of course, offered to loan him some cash, but he had stubbornly held out. In the end, a quick trip to the park and a wide area summoning charm followed by a trip to a bank to change the numerous formerly lost coins into paper bills had eased the burden enough that with a bit of magic to transfigure his own GI instead of buying one, he was able to pay. Once he was officially enrolled, he spent his first lesson learning the very basics of form, how to punch and kick properly without hurting yourself, the most basic ready stance, and how to move with a fall to help decrease the chances of injury. The other Rangers had been more than helpful in their tutoring of him throughout the week so that by the time his next Saturday lesson started, Harry was moving with the grace and speed of someone who had been practicing for much longer than he actually had, much to his own surprise. When he brought up this extreme learning curve, Zordon had reminded Harry of his connection to the grid and how it would improve his rate of information retention and muscle memory development in regard to his fighting skills. It had certainly helped ease his nerves as his unnaturally quickly developing reflexes had thrown Harry off at first. He was actually more surprised that more of the other students hadn't approached him about how skilled he appeared to have become in so short a time, but the few that mentioned it seemed to explain it away themselves with the extra teachings they had seen him getting from several known acquaintances of their teacher. And if that was how they wanted to explain it, then Harry wasn't going to try and convince them otherwise. At the same time as his martial arts tuition was going on, Zordon had started Harry on learning to control his grid power. They had begun with a great deal of meditation and learning to access and manipulate the mode of energy within himself. It was a much more complicated process than just pulling up the power and letting it guide him as he had been doing. He needed to learn to instruct the power on what he wanted done as opposed to surrendering total control to it. It was more similar to Harry's own magic than his limited experience with grid magic thus far, and yet still different enough to cause issue. If there was one plus to his lessons though, aside from the more obvious learning to use his new power, it was that he had gotten a further explanation for the seemingly random gesticulation he had noticed multiple times since joining the Rangers in their battles. Apparently, those seemingly nonsensical hand and body movements were caused by the grid because they were vital components to utilizing the power. Zordon had likened them to Harry's own wand movements, though more along the lines of gathering the power as opposed to guiding it to the appropriate spell effect. More importantly to Harry, the movements would become less and less necessary as the wielder grew more experienced. This was something that Harry was rather happy to hear, as the currently necessary motions to prepare even the simplest of spells left him feeling rather stupid. His suffering would continue with the poses and declarations though, those were just because the grid liked the showboating. Among the first lessons Zordon taught him after learning to access the power was how to determine his specialty. Apparently Rita specialized in magics of destruction and various rituals, quite fitting for a psycho who wanted to conquer/destroy the Earth. Zordon, when he had been free from his time warp prison, had been rather capable with illusions and various mind magics. This tied in with his own physical fighting prowess and led to him being more of a stealth fighter when possible. Of course, these specializations were on top of typical general use spells. Harry had compared them to the various branches of magics he was familiar with from his own homeworld and how he had been particularly apt at learning and using more combat-oriented spells while others had been better with certain types of charms or transfiguration. A comparison that Zordon accepted, though he had little to go on other than Harry's own insistence that similarities existed. In any case, after a battery of tests where Harry spent most of his time channeling grid power for Zordon to examine, it came to light that Harry leaned toward what Zordon called kinetic magics. These spells affected motion and force. Some of the highest-level kinetic spells that the wizened mage had heard of could be used to allow the caster to fly under their own power. This was a prospect that Harry was more than ready to explore. However, magical flight would have to wait as Harry still had a long list of basics to learn and MSTR before he could even begin to attempt the simplest of kinetic magics. And so Harry had had a rather busy few weeks. With his initial success in the beginner's karate class, Jason had given Harry clearance to join up with his regular lessons after his second Saturday lesson. He was scheduled to join short, 1-hour classes on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and a longer one on Saturday mornings. With this, along with additional instruction from the other Rangers that he had been talked into continuing, Harry was confident that he would be able to physically defend himself well enough to get by in 1 or 2 months. His grid magic skills, while not increasing at nearly the same speed as his martial arts ability, were still growing all the time. On top of his training, Harry had started putting in more and more hours working at the youth center. After his money issues revolving around the karate class, he was a bit more eager to get some financial stability going, and until he could get back into disenchanting his galleons with his new wand, the youth center was his best source of income. Ernie had been more than generous with his curiously lenient working schedule, but he was equally happy to have Harry there every day they were open. So that's what Harry did. He would wake up in the command center each morning, eat a quick breakfast, tend to his morning routine, and then spend the first several hours of his day in meditation and training with Zordon. Once the clock hit 2 in the afternoon, Harry would teleport to the youth center and spend the next few hours working to help set things up for the after-school rush. Jason and the other Rangers, sometimes including Tommy and sometimes not, would show up after school let out and Harry would excuse himself to change into his GI. On those days he had class, Harry would join Jason's other students. When Jason was teaching a different group, Harry would spend time training with the other Rangers, usually Zach and Trini since they were more skilled in martial arts than Kimberly and Billy. On the days Tommy came along he would occasionally give a bit of advice, but he largely kept to his own devices unless someone specifically asked for his input. When the class ended, Harry would change back into his regular clothes and spend another few hours working. He typically stayed until most of the crowd had left and helped Ernie with cleaning things up a bit before leaving him to close for the night and going back to the command center. It was a somewhat grueling schedule, especially at first, but Harry was finding himself growing accustomed to it even after only really being on it for a week. Harry snapped his mind out of the slight daze he had adopted as Jason led the class through the kata they were studying when the Red Ranger called his name. "Harry, come up here for a second." Raising an eyebrow curiously, Harry made his way from his spot in the middle of the pack to stand next to Jason. "All right, copy me." Jason almost immediately started moving, calling out the same steps of the kata they had just been doing and leaving Harry to scramble to get into form. After running through the entire thing, twice, Jason nodded sharply, his brow slightly furrowed. "Not bad, Harry. Make sure you're concentrating on your footwork, though. You were a little out of position a few times." Harry was confused. As far as he could tell his feet had been right where they were supposed to be, but Jason was the teacher after all. With an internal sigh, he gave Jason a small bow before returning to his spot in the class as Jason spoke once more. "All right everyone, good job today. I'll be seeing you all next week." After a bow to his class, returned by them all, Jason dismissed them. With his third ever Saturday class over, Harry turned and jogged to the youth center's locker rooms, grabbed a quick shower and changed back into his street clothes before taking his place once more behind the juice bar. Ernie was a bit swamped by the released students and their families and eagerly welcomed Harry's help. An hour or so later, Zach came into the youth center, bouncing a basketball as he went. Harry noted his presence, but quickly turned his attention back to the stovetop he was working at, idly prodding the hamburger patties Ernie had set him to cooking for Bulk and Skull. The two bullies were sitting at a table a short distance away from the counter, watching the various teens using the exercise equipment around the youth center and mocking them occasionally. His concentration on his cooking was broken by the jubilant voice of the Black Ranger as Zach eased himself onto a stool across the counter from Harry. "So, how's it going there, Ranger who flipped patties?" Harry groaned slightly. In the days following his telling of his past, all of the Rangers had had further questions for him. He had fielded questions on his classes, Quidditch, his friends and dorm mates, Hogwarts itself, some of the battles he had fought, and even a few more detailed questions on his life with the Dursleys, but Zach had always been the one to ask the most seemingly nonsensical ones. It seemed that Harry now knew the reason behind Zach's questions about his title, both before and after ending the war. "Zach," Harry sighed. "Aside from the fact that that is an absolutely horrible name, I can practically hear the hyphens in your speech. Cut it out before I have to curse you." Zach merely laughed, a sly look forming on his face. "Oh, and what kind of curse would we be talking about? You really can't do too much here in public." Seeing that the burgers were in no danger of burning for a bit, Harry turned to face him, noting the presence of Angela, the girl that Zach had declared the love of his life, as she walked into the youth center. He smirked. "Oh, I could think of a few. For example, I could use a babbling hex on you. You would be completely unable to stop talking about the most random things no matter how hard you tried. Then I could couple it with a compulsion charm to make you unerringly seek out Angela's company. Best part is that at this range, I could cast both spells without anyone seeing them. That would certainly be an interesting combination, wouldn't you say?" Zach's eyes widened before he spun on his stool, seeing Angela on the youth center gym floor, and spun back around, laughing uneasily now. "Ah, well, we wouldn't want that then, would we?" Harry smiled at the ranger before turning back to the stove. With deft movements, Harry took the patties off the stove and assembled the 2 fully dressed burgers on their plates, placed the plates on a tray, and took it over to the counter next to Zach. "Bulk. Skull," he called to the 2. "Order up." With hunger dancing in his eyes, Bulk shoved himself away from the small table, coincidentally pushing it into Skull as he did and knocking the skinnier teen down. With a swagger in his step that was more comical than anything else, Bulk made his way to the counter. "It's about time you got these done," he snapped, giving Harry a sneer. "Yeah," Skull parroted, having climbed back to his feet and run up next to Bulk. "It's about time." Rolling his eyes, Harry pushed the tray over to the 2. "They get done when they get done, guys. I can't speed up the cooking process without ruining the food." Bulk squinted slightly, looking somewhat constipated in Harry's mind, before speaking again. "You know you should be giving us better service than this. We're famous, you know." Zach let out a short bark of laughter. "You too? Famous? Give me a break." Harry couldn't help but agree, but before he could comment, Bulk rounded on the other teen. "DMN right, we're famous. We helped the Power Rangers chase off that big gold guy a few weeks ago. They even interviewed us for the news." Zach leaned back slightly and turned his face away from Bulk, shooting Harry a look of incredulity. "You know, I think I saw that interview, Bulk. Didn't they say that you guys were taken hostage and then saved by the mysterious cloaked figure that's been spotted helping the Power Rangers a few times?" Bulk jerked back quickly, his face turning red in embarrassment before he tried to cover it up with bluster. "Well then the news guys got it wrong. We were right there in the thick of it with the Rangers, and if it weren't for us, they wouldn't have won." "Yeah, right in the thick of it," Skull shouted, nearly climbing on top of Bulk in his effort to stare Zach down. Harry just rolled his eyes again. "Well, whatever the case, why don't you guys just take your burgers and move on? I have other orders to fill." Bulk spun to face Harry again, knocking Skull off balance as he did. The flailing teen accidentally smacked his hand into the back of Bulk's head, somehow propelling him forward and face first into the 2 burgers Harry had just finished making for them. As the overweight teen slowly rose up, bits of bread and tomato liberally covered in ketchup and mustard stuck to his face, Zach started laughing again. "Well," he said through his chuckles. "That's one way to do it." Nearly growling, Bulk took the tray with the now squashed hamburgers in one hand and grabbed Skull by his jacket with the other. Dragging Skull behind him, Bulk went back to their table and plopped down in his seat before starting in on his deformed meal. Harry was shaking his head as Zach's laughter died. "You know," he mused, "I really don't understand how that always happens." "What's that?" Zach asked after he calmed down. Harry waved his hand toward the food-covered teen, now fending off Skull as he tried to get his own burger off the tray. Apparently Bulk was going to eat both as payback for Skull knocking him into the food. How Bulk and Skull always end up either knocking something over or getting covered in various foodstuffs. I mean, seriously, every single day they come in here, either one or the other happens. "That's not necessarily true," Ernie interjected as he walked up from behind Harry, nodding to Zach in greeting. "Sometimes they get covered in paint or something. Not edible." Harry smiled at Ernie's good-natured jab. "My point stands though. How and why?" "Harry, my man," Zach said with an easy smile, leaning over the counter to rest one hand on Harry's shoulder. "Some mysteries are better left unsolved." Harry snorted briefly before turning back to the stove and starting to scrub the residue from the burger patties off. He only got a few strokes in before Zach once more spoke. "So I had a reason for coming over here actually." Harry half turned toward him, showing the ranger his raised eyebrow. "Oh? So you weren't just here to make up stupid names for me then?" Ernie coughed slightly, an intrigued look on his face, but Zach soldiered on. "Nope. I wanted to see if you wanted to join the guys and me in the park for some b-ball." Harry finished cleaning the stovetop before turning to face Zach, idly tossing his cleaning rag between his hands. "I don't know, Zach, I'm not really a basketball kind of guy. I don't think I've ever even played to tell the truth." "Come on, man," Zach was near pleading now. Even Tommy is going to be there, at least until he has to head off to his karate practice. You've just gotta come. I think you should go, Harry. Ernie said suddenly, bringing Harry out of his thoughts and making Zach smile. You've been spending too much time around here lately. I know that you need the money and are more than willing to help out, but you should spend more time with your friends. Get yourself some fresh air before it gets too cold outside to do it anymore. We're already more than halfway through September, and this time of year we won't get too many more clear days like today. Yeah, come on, Harry. Zach cheered, nearly dancing in his seat as he saw Harry's resistance fade. Finally, Harry sighed and pulled off his cooking apron before handing it to Ernie. Fine, but I go under protest. The smile that took over Zach's face sparked off a similar one on his own as the ranger danced over to the others, presumably to inform them of Harry's attendance. Go on and get yourself cleaned up, Harry. Ernie said, patting Harry on the shoulder as he took the cleaning rag from him. I'll finish up here. You just go out and have some fun. Harry sighed, wondering what he had just gotten himself into as he headed over to the sink to wash up. As it turned out, he got himself into getting schooled in basketball. Oh yes, school was in session and the Zachman was the teacher. And Zach had been saying that so much since the group had arrived at the courts in the park that Harry was now narrating it to himself in his head. Harry groaned as he shook himself slightly, idly watching from the sidelines as Jason tried, and failed, to block yet another shot from the Black Ranger. The Magi Ranger found himself sitting on a picnic table bench next to Billy with Kimberly and Trini sitting on the tabletop behind them, watching as the Red and Black Rangers tested their basketball skills against each other. Tommy was standing behind the goal, both to help retrieve the ball as necessary and because he was the next scheduled to take the court against the incredibly skilled Zach. Not that Harry felt his attempt should really even count. He hadn't even been on the court for more than a few minutes before Zach realized he hadn't been kidding when he said he had never played before. The next several minutes had been spent with Zach and the others giving him various pointers on how to properly dribble and shoot the ball before they unanimously decided to just show him how it was done, resulting in the current arrangement. All in all, he preferred Quidditch. Give him a flying broomstick and a golden snitch and Harry would show Zach how to play a real game. Harry tuned back into the game in time to hear Zach taunting Jason again. Now it's time for my slamma jamma, double whamma, hip hop it 'cause you can't stop it, big disgrace 'cause it's in your face, long shot. The moment he finished speaking, Zach snapped up the ball and jumped into the air, almost easily getting his shot past Jason's attempted block and sinking yet another three-pointer. Harry groaned again and leaned slightly toward Trini. I really don't know what's worse, the fact that he's winning so easily, or the fact that he's so casually taunting everyone as he does so. Trini smiled at him, trying and failing to fight down a giggle at the dejected look on his face as she patted his shoulder comfortingly. Don't worry about it, Harry, I guess basketball just isn't your sport. Harry smiled weakly before turning back to the court, seeing that Tommy had now actually joined Jason as the two attempted to double-team the Black Ranger. Unfortunately for them, however, Zach was still nearly unbeatable. The few times Jason and Tommy managed to score it was only by tricking Zach out of position. More often than not, he would almost easily snag the ball out of the air when the other two tried to pass it around, which only increased the lead he had over his two friends. Harry just shook his head in disbelief as the score gap increased. Then, after a quick series of passes, Tommy tried to drive in to score, only for Zach to block him, almost casually knocking the attempted shot aside and knocking the Green Ranger off balance. While Zach helped Tommy back up, an easy smile on his face, the ball bounced off the court and onto the grass opposite where Harry and the others were sitting. Before any of the players could even start toward the ball, the air was split with the sound of the high-pitched mumbling of Rita's putty patrollers as a group of 7 appeared in a flash of light. Almost cautiously, one of them bent down and picked up the basketball, tilting his head this way and that as it examined it before holding it up tauntingly and looking toward the Rangers. Look, Billy called, slightly panicked. Putties. Come on, Trini said with a slight scowl, idly grabbing Kimberly's arm as the two girls climbed down from atop the picnic table. Oh good, Harry joked, glancing toward Billy as they stood as well. I was getting bored of basketball anyway. Everybody spread out. Jason said, once more using his overly loud, near-shouting command voice that he tended to slip into during tense situations. Harry and the other Rangers spread out around the court as each was approached by a putty. Casually shaking his hands and bouncing in place to try and loosen himself up, Harry watched the clay construct approaching him even as he touched the power within him and brought a hint to the surface. There was no way he was going to try and fight this thing without a little support, but it might be a good idea to see how far he had come in his martial arts training. The court was soon filled with the sound of grunts and shouts, accompanied by the unique sounds Tommy made when he fought, as Harry's putty charged him. The creature came in almost blindly at first, its hands stretched out in front of it in an attempt to grab onto the mage. Harry almost casually sidestepped it, lashing out with one hand and striking the putty in the back, knocking it off balance and sending it into a tumbling roll that it quickly recovered from. The putty quickly spun around, this time moving in and sending a spin kick at Harry's face, prompting him to duck underneath the attack. Before he could make an attempt at a counterattack though, the basketball they had been playing with flew through the air and bounced off his face, knocking his glasses askew and throwing him to the ground. The ball, after ricocheting off his face, hit the putty in the chest, somehow knocking it back to the ground. Luckily enough, this kept the putty from following up on its attack on Harry, though the wizard wasn't quite sure he appreciated the thought. "I really hate basketball," Harry mumbled, fixing his glasses and climbing back to his feet as the putty did the same before charging him again. This time, the creature led with a punch. Acting on instinct, Harry leaned to one side, letting the punch go past him before grabbing onto it with his left hand and jerking it forward. As the putty stumbled, Harry almost casually drove his right fist into its stomach in a quick jab, only to then release the putty and clamp his left hand over his slightly throbbing right. "What the hell are these things made out of?" he complained. "Screw this, I'm sticking with what I know." Turning to face his opponent once more, Harry stepped in close before delivering a palm strike with the heel of his left hand. Upon contact, Harry released a stunning spell into the putty, the brief flash of red light diminished by the proximity of the casting. The result, the putty dropped almost instantly and Harry had to shake off a bit of wooziness from his wandless magic side effects. Shortly after it fell, the putty vanished in a flash of light. Looking around quickly after settling into a slightly off-balance stance, Harry noticed that the others had vanished as well. "Harry," Billy said, making his way over to the off-balance wizard. "Are you all right?" Harry shook himself slightly before responding. Yeah, I'll be all right. I cast a wandless stunner on mine and I'm just shaking off the effects." "Did you try and fight it first?" Jason asked, letting himself relax slightly since the obvious threat was now gone. "Try and put some of what you've learned to use?" Harry rolled his eyes as Billy followed him back to the picnic table, the Blue Ranger keeping a close eye on him in case he started to fall. "Yes, as a matter of fact I did. It just didn't work out too well. What the heck are those guys made out of anyway? I've never noticed any of you having any problem while fighting them, but I punched that one and nearly screwed up my hand." Jason shared a glance with the other Rangers, all of whom were smiling good-naturedly at Harry's plight. "It's something you get used to after practicing martial arts for a while." Harry just groaned yet again. "Well, in the meantime I think I'll just stick to cursing any more that I fight and leave it at that." Kimberly squinted at him for a moment. "That may be a good idea, Harry. Did you get hit in the face? You're pretty red." Harry winced at the memory and reflexively raised his good hand to his slightly sore nose. "No, actually that was the freaking basketball. Stupid bloody game." Harry's grumbling set off another round of laughter from the other teens before Zach ran off to recover said ball. Before they could get back to their game though, Tommy announced that he had to leave. Apparently the short battle with the putties had led to him checking the time and noticing he was going to be late for his karate practice if he didn't hurry it up. As the Green Ranger left the area and Harry continued to pout, the other Rangers got back to their game. This time, Kimberly joined Zach and Jason as the three idly passed the ball around, taking turns at trying to make various crazy shots while Trini and Billy went over to a recently arrived hot dog vendor to get everyone food. Harry was slightly concerned at the thought that the vendor apparently hadn't seen the very recent putty attack, but it was entirely possible that he had, but was used to such things after so many months of Rita's attacks. It wasn't until Harry heard an irritatingly familiar voice that he looked back toward the court to see Bulk and Skull trying to harass the Rangers once more. "Game over, wimps," Bulk announced, snatching the basketball out of the air. "This is our space." Jason, Kimberly, and Zach made their way over to confront the two punks while Harry stood to join them. "Yeah?" Jason shot back. "Well, it's our space too, and that is our ball." "Oh, it's your ball?" Bulk mocked, talking in a baby voice. "And his mommy said we can't play with it." Skull broke into his gratingly high-pitched laughter while Bulk continued glaring at the teens. "Don't you guys ever get bored of this?" Harry asked, cutting through the annoying laughter and bringing the bully's attention to him. "Hey, look, Skull," Bulk said, tossing the ball over his shoulder and starting toward Harry. "It's the wimp from the youth center. Ernie's new help." Harry sighed, idly rubbing between his eyes before speaking. "Hardly new, Bulk. I've been working there for over a month now." "Yeah," Bulk said slowly, his face screwing up in confusion for a second before returning to glaring. "Well, we owe you for earlier." "Yeah, for earlier." Harry raised an eyebrow and shot a glance at the other Rangers before giving the bullies a flat look. "Oh? And may I ask what for? Skull froze for a second before turning to Bulk. Yeah, Bulk, what for? Bulk rounded on the skinny teen and grabbed his shirt. For messing up our burgers, you half-wit. Skull looked confused for a moment before he suddenly perked up and turned toward Harry again. Yeah, for our burgers. Harry held his blank look. As I recall, Skull, you were the one to knock Bulk into your food. That's hardly my fault. Skull once more turned to Bulk, nodding with a goofy smile on his face. You know, he's got a point there, Bulky. Bulk just growled, using his grip on Skull's shirt to throw him off to one side as he moved to stand right in front of Harry, his face mere inches from the Rangers. Well, I don't think so. And I'm gonna make you pay for it. Harry held his ground, staring evenly back into the bully's eyes. He had more than a little experience with dealing with guys like Bulk, both from his cousin Dudley and from his time dealing with Draco Malfoy at Hogwarts. So he stayed where he was, showing as little emotion as possible, not even speaking until he saw the larger bully start to shift uneasily. Walk away, Bulk, before you do something that you'll regret. The warning was delivered in a hard, flat tone, one he hadn't really used since the war in his old world. One that gave hint to the toughness he had had to build up just to survive in a world that was led by a terrorist whose primary goal was to kill him. It turned out to be more than enough to break through the bully's bravado as he quickly backed off. Yeah, well, Bulk looked rather panicked as he started rapidly backpedaling away from Harry. I have better things to do anyway. You got off lucky this ti-dash. Bulk's speech was cut off when he tripped over the sprawled form of Skull, still laying where he had fallen when Bulk threw him away. After tripping, Bulk stumbled and ultimately fell, crashing into the hot dog cart Billy and Trini were at, knocking over several containers of condiments and other toppings and spilling their contents all over him. Harry just shook his head as the other Rangers smothered their laughter at Bulk's predicament, even as the hot dog vendor rounded on him and started demanding that he pay for the toppings he had spilled. Billy and Trini rejoined them, handing out the hot dogs they had procured before Bulk's accident and were quickly caught up on what had happened. Yeah, Zach explained with another huge smile on his face. Harry went all hardcore on him. It was more phenomenal. The wizard blushed slightly. I have some experience with bullies like him. They're all bluster. I'm still more concerned with how one or both of them always end up covered in food. It boggles the mind. Zach just started laughing again. Like I said, Harry, some mysteries are better left unsolved. Rolling his eyes at the answer, Harry and the other Rangers moved back to the table once more to eat their hot dogs while Bulk and Skull were forced to push the vendor's cart away while he ranted about them working off the wasted ingredients. Zach and Jason were the first to finish eating and they quickly moved back onto the court to resume their game. By this point, Harry was more than ready to call it a day and head back to the command center to relax for a bit. But after Zach blocked yet another shot from Jason, knocking the ball off the court, things changed. As soon as the ball stopped moving, it exploded. Holy SHT! Zach, who had been going to retrieve the ball and was therefore the closest, jerked back in fright, backpedaling quickly to meet up with Harry and the others as they all gathered together. Look over there! Kimberly pointed to a nearby tree line where Squat and Babu were standing with a spike-covered turtle monster with what looked like a stoplight coming out of the top of its shell. Alright then. It's morphin' time! Jason called out after glancing around to make sure they were otherwise alone. Shrugging, Harry pulled out his wand and took his morphing stance alongside the others. Mastodon. Pterodactyl. Triceratops. Saber-toothed tiger. Tyrannosaurus. Magi Ranger, power up. Harry once more felt a rush of energy wash over him as his ranger suit formed. When the light faded from them all, the Rangers were standing once more in their suits and, much to Harry's irritation, in a group battle pose. Hurry, Babu called, pointing to the Rangers. The go beam. Nodding its head, the turtle monster faced the posing Rangers as the green light on his traffic light started glowing before a lance of energy shot out, hitting Trini and suffusing her with a green aura. Almost immediately, Trini started running in place. Oh no, she shouted, panicked. What's going on? I can't stop moving. Relaxing out of his pose, Harry summoned the Magi staff even as the other Rangers charged toward the three monsters. With a wave of his weapon, Harry levitated the Yellow Ranger just as she started to turn to run off and then cast a diagnostic charm. Harry said after a moment. There's some kind of spell on you. Well yeah. Trini snapped, sounding somewhat irritated even through her panic. I think that's kind of obvious. Harry smiled under his helmet. Sorry, just talking things out. The thing is that it doesn't feel like any of Rita's other monsters that I've seen. That's because this one isn't like any other you've seen, Harry. Zordon's voice came from his communicator. Lifting it to the mouthpiece on his helmet, Harry responded. Do you have any input, Zordon? Do you know why this spell seems so different to me? Indeed I do, Harry, Zordon responded quickly, almost sounding smug if Harry were to judge. In this case, the reason that the energy doesn't feel familiar to you is because there is no magic of the Elder Wand in this new monster. I suspect that Rita had nothing to do with the creation of this creature. Based on Squat and Babu's presence without Golder or Scorpina, I believe that they created this monster themselves. And that means what exactly? Trini asked, slightly calmer now, but still more than ready to get rid of whatever spell the turtle had used on her. It means that Harry can break the spell if he uses his own power properly. Harry glanced up at Trini, surprise on his hidden face before glancing back down toward the communicator incredulously. Okay, but I don't really recall being taught any kind of cancellation spell using grid power, Zordon. How am I supposed to be able to fix this? Your morph gives you several benefits, Harry. Zordon seemed to be going into a lecture mode, though Harry felt it might not be the best time as he heard the telltale sounds of explosions as the other rangers battled with the turtle monster nearby. One of the greatest of such is how it combines the two brands of magics you wield into a much stronger whole. If you focus properly, you can use your unique magic as a framework and power your spells with grid energies. By casting this way, you should be able to use your own cancellation spell to break the enchantment on Trini, and indeed break any spell that isn't reinforced by the magic of a more powerful magic user with relatively little difficulty. Harry blinked, glanced up at Trini, and then blinked again. All right, he said slowly. I suppose I can give it a shot if you think it'll work. Trust in your instincts, Harry. Zordon responded calmly. Trust in your instincts and trust in the morphing grid. The power will guide you. Right, Harry nodded as he lowered his arm and firmed up his grip on the Magi staff. Hold still as best you can, Trini. This should only take a second hopefully. Trini just stared at him, her arms and legs still pumping uncontrollably under the effects of the monster's beam. That's not too reassuring, Harry. Harry just shrugged before calling up his power, letting the purple aura engulf him as he relaxed as best he could. It was a technique that he and Zordon had worked on rather extensively during his training as it allowed a student to use the more complex grid powers the easiest. Needless to say, it wasn't the best or simplest thing to do during a pitched battle, but it worked in a pinch. Almost immediately, Harry felt the power flowing through him and, working as quickly as he could, grabbed a hold of it before impressing his need onto it. This was the most basic technique for casting with grid power. As a result, it was also the least efficient, but he had to start somewhere. Feeling the power accept his command after a few seconds, Harry was more than a bit surprised to feel his own magic rise up as well and mix with the grip power. A few more seconds later and Harry felt himself start moving, spinning his staff around his body, passing it from one hand to another while it began glowing as he channeled power into it. Finally, he moved the staff toward Trini. Finite incantatum. Trini was briefly surrounded by a purple glow before she both stopped running in midair, and stopped floating in midair as Harry's counterspell cancelled both the monster's spell and Harry's levitation charm. Whoops! Harry said with a slight laugh. Sorry about that, Trini. Moving quickly, Harry switched his staff to his left hand before offering his right to help her back up. Accepting his help, Trini climbed back to her feel. You can make it up to me later, for now we have to help the others. Turning toward the battle, Harry noticed that Trini was right. As ridiculous as the turtle looked with that stoplight coming out of him, it was apparently not a monster to take lightly. It had somehow acquired a baseball bat and was using it to great effect in warding off the Rangers, occasionally sending one of them flying in a shower of sparks as it scored a hit. Nearby, Squat and Babu were cheering the monster on while Squat recorded the entire battle on video camera. Alright then. Before Harry and Trini could move in to help, the turtle seemed to grow tired of beating on their friends with his bat as it grabbed Zack and threw him into the other three, making them all fall into a pile. Alright then, it shouted as it drew its right arm back into its shell, taking the bat with it before the arm came back out without it. Now it's time for Shellshock to show you his stop ray. After flailing its arms around briefly, Shellshock's red light started glowing before blasting the 4 downed Rangers with a wide area beam of red light. Jason, having managed to struggle out of the tangle of limbs that he and the others had become, barely managed to dodge out of the way. When the light faded, it revealed Zack, Kimberly, and Billy frozen on the ground where they had been lying. No! Jason cried dramatically, summoning his power sword and charging the turtle, Trini pulling her daggers and following behind. What did you do to my friends, you freak? Shellshock just laughed as it turned on the spot, deflecting Jason's first sword strike off its shell before completing the spin and bringing his oversized claw hands down across Jason's torso. The same thing I'm going to do to you, Red Ranger. You and the other Rangers are finished. Then Trini leapt into the air and brought her daggers down across Shellshock's head, knocking the monster down and sending sparks flying. What? It roared in confusion. How did you break free of my go beam? You should have been miles away from here by now. You aren't the only one around here with magic, mate. Harry shouted from next to the frozen rangers, spinning his glowing staff as he did so. Finally, with yet another move from his focus, Harry released his spell once more. Finite Incantatum. Just as with Trini, the three rangers were covered briefly in a purple glow before the spell holding them in place broke and they started moving again. Oh man, Zack groaned as he struggled to his feet. What happened? No time now, Harry said, helping Kimberly up as Billy too regained his feet. Kill the turtle and I'll explain later. Right, Zack nodded, striking a pose before summoning his power axe. Let's do this, Rangers. Without another word, Zack and the others charged in to assist Jason and Trini against Shellshock. With their weapons now in hand and with the monster not having its bat, the Rangers were having a much easier time keeping it on its back foot. Harry, though, still wasn't quite confident enough in his close combat skills to join them. Instead, he decided to stay back and look for an opportunity to assist magically. Then he caught sight of Squat and Babu and a smirk crossed his face. Hopping in place, Harry brought his feet together before leaping into the air toward the two dim-witted servants of Rita. After flipping once, he landed behind them, making enough noise that they both spun to face him and almost immediately recoiled. Hello, boys, Harry drawled, brandishing his weapon as he turned to face them. It's been a bit, hasn't it? Gah! Babu shouted. It's the Magaling. Oh yeah, Squat shouted back, still holding the camera for some reason. Golder said he got his own ranger powers. I forgot about that. Oh no, what are we gonna do? Babu was practically dancing in place now in his panic. Harry just felt a bit sorry for them. Before he could start in on them, he heard Jason calling for the power blaster. Alright guys, let's bring M together. Power axe. Power bow. Power daggers. Power lance. Power sword. As the four of the five rangers threw their weapons into the air, they all combined into one weapon. The bow and the axe connected to form something like a crossbow while the daggers and two halves of Billy's lance attached to the underside of the bow and parallel to the axe/cannon's barrel with the bladed ends pointing backward. Finally, Jason leapt up and placed his sword down along the top before bringing the entire thing down to the rest of them as they stood in formation. Power blaster. They chanted together. Fire. The main gun at the butt end of the axe along with the round bottom ends of each of the daggers and lance pieces lit up with bright light before beams of energy shot out of each of them. The beams then began to spin around each other, eventually forming into one solid beam of energy that flew toward the panicking turtle monster. However, before the beam could hit and inevitably destroy said monster, a bright flash of lightning struck down just in front of it, destabilizing the beam and saving Shellshock from the Ranger's finisher. Do you really think I'd make it that easy? Harry whipped his head to the side to see Rita standing a short distance away. Cursing to himself, Harry moved around the stunned forms of Squat and Babu who were staring at Rita in fear so he could regroup with the other Rangers. Rita followed his movement, but didn't speak until he had joined his comrades. So, Magaling, Zordon is teaching you to use real power and you decided to use it to join with his band of goody-goodies. How disappointing. I do believe that I've turned down your offer to join you in the past, Rita. I don't see how me joining with the Rangers more formally is any more of a surprise or a disappointment than my initial refusal. Rita just scowled before glancing over at the still frozen forms of Squat and Babu. Get over here you nitwits. Squat and Babu jumped as if stung before scurrying over to Rita's side, Squat leaving the camera behind, and immediately prostrating themselves before her, babbling as they did so. We're so sorry your evilness. We just wanted to surprise you. Yeah, and Shellshock was doing really well until the Magaling broke his spell over the other Rangers. He almost won. Rita let a wicked smile stretch across her face as her eyes trailed over the turtle monster that had moved to stand near her as well. Yes, perhaps you're right. We are? Squat asked, perking up slightly before glancing at Babu who had done the same. Yes, of course we are. Babu immediately answered, nodding frantically. We did good this time. Yes, perhaps you did do well this time though it seems as though Shellshock will need a bit of help against the Rangers even now. You can't beat us Rita. Why don't you just give it up? Jason demanded. Harry had to fight down the urge to facepalm. Rita, however, seemed to be ignoring the Red Ranger. Yes, it is far too late for me to properly empower him, but that doesn't mean I can't make him grow. With a sharp JRK, Rita flipped her staff into a two-handed grip before blasting the ground around Shellshock with a bolt of red lightning. As Rita, Squat and Babu vanished in a flash of light, the earth split open and a blast of smoke shot out, engulfing the turtle monster and increasing its size exponentially. "Alright, guys," Jason called, turning to face the other rangers. "Let's do this thing." Turning around once more, Jason threw his right arm into the air, a pose matched by the others while Harry watched. "We need dinosaur power, now." As the Zords arrived with a great deal of earth-shaking and mechanical roaring, Harry felt just a bit left out. After watching the now giant Shellshock move to engage the Megazord a bit closer to the city, Harry twisted in place, apparating himself to the top of a skyscraper, hoping that he would be able to assist if needed. The fight seemed to be rather even, all things told. The two titans were about the same size, though Shellshock's shell gave it a bit more bulk and the stoplight technically made it taller. Beyond that, though, they seemed to be about equal in speed and power. As the fight moved fully into the city proper, mostly through stumbling and knockback from powerful blows, Harry once more apparat from building to building, looking for an opportunity to strike and keeping his power at the ready. Then, with a powerful right hook, the Megazord sent Shellshock sprawling, the monster screaming out in pain as it rolled away. Over his communicator, Harry heard Jason shouting encouragement. "That's it, guys, we've got him on the run. Now let's finish him. We need the power sword." Lightning flashed in the sky as the massive, compared to Harry, sword came flying down from wherever it was kept when not in use, easily caught by the Megazord when it got close enough. Shellshock regained its feet and charged toward the massive machine, retracting its head in time to avoid a swipe from the power sword, only for a large cannon barrel to come out in its place. "How about a taste of this, Power Rangers?" The monster mocked before a blast of energy fired out of the cannon at point-blank range, knocking the Megazord backwards and to the ground. And now, Shellshock mocked once more, reorienting the cannon on the downed Megazord despite the fact that its eyes were blocked by that same cannon. "You're through." CRP, Harry mumbled, drawing his power up fully and sending a fireball flying toward the turtle. Just before the cannon fired again, Harry's attack smashed into Shellshock, making it rear back in surprise and causing its blast to fly into the air instead of at the down machine. "Good job, Harry," Jason said over his communicator. "We're having some trouble getting the Megazord back up. Just do what you can to hold him off." "Right," Harry mumbled, pulling up more power and channeling it into his staff as he spun it. "Easier said than done, I think." Shellshock was back on his feet again, the cannon now replaced once more by his head as he glared toward Harry on top of his building. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you, Ranger?" the turtle asked, irritation in its voice as it stomped closer to Harry's position. "Now I'm gonna have to squash you flat." Growling to himself, Harry released the built-up power in his staff, summoning a bolt of lightning that arced from his focus and raked across the giant turtle's face. Shellshock cried out in pain as sparks flew from the point of impact before a small explosion lit up the area, shrouding the monster temporarily in smoke. When the smoke cleared, however, it was revealed that the monster was mostly fine, with only a few scorch marks for its trouble. The turtle laughed. "I guess I'm just too much for you, you little pipsqueak." With further laughter, Shellshock withdrew its right arm into its shell and produced its baseball bat once more. As the monster drew it back to smash into him, Harry froze. There was literally nothing he could do to take this thing down. Even with all his new power and training, he still didn't have anything in his arsenal truly effective against something this size. Before Shellshock could end him, however, a very welcome six-note song echoed through the air, followed immediately by the whistling sound that accompanied a rain of missiles from the Dragonzord. Shellshock was knocked off balance by the first salvo of missiles, and the second knocked it to the ground, forcing the giant turtle, shouting out its defiant rage as it climbed back to its feet to face off against the Dragonzord that now stood protectively near the still-down Megazord. Harry let out a breath of relief before activating his communicator. "Cutting it a bit close there, Tommy?" Tommy's voice came with a bit of a chuckle. "Sorry about that, Harry, you alright?" Harry nodded before remembering Tommy probably couldn't see him. "Yeah, the others are down for the moment and I managed to freeze up at about the worst possible time, but I'm still here. We're not down anymore." Jason's triumphant voice cut across the communication channel as the Megazord climbed slowly back to its feet, the power sword being used as a crutch until it stood upright again. The Dragonzord turned briefly toward the Megazord before roaring and turning back toward Shellshock, the drill on its tail spinning as it prepared to charge. Shellshock brandished its bat for a second before a smirk grew on its face. "I think you guys need to take a break." Before any of the Rangers could react, the red light on Shellshock's stoplight flashed brightly and the red stop ray shot out, engulfing both the Megazord and Dragonzord, freezing them in place. "Oh, bloody hell," Harry gasped. "That's not good." Almost immediately, Jason started shouting across the communications channel again. "Zordon! We can't move. I know, Jason, Shellshock's stop ray has frozen both the Megazord and Dragonzord cold. Harry. Trini spoke next, though Harry could hear sounds of panic from the others in the background. Can you break through the spell on the Zords like you did for us earlier? Thinking quickly, Harry shook his head. I don't think so, Trini. The last time I cast a spell on something that big, it was a pretty heavy drain on my reserves, and the counter spell is much more complex than the body bind I used on Golder and Scorpina. Not to mention I don't know how long it would take to gather enough power to cast it properly. Shellshock was dancing in celebration, supremely confident in his victory. It was probably only this that gave them any sort of chance now. There has to be something we can do, Kimberly said, panicking along with her teammates. We can't even get out of here. The access hatches are all frozen shut just like the rest of the Megazord. Even now the internal magics of the power within each Zord are combating the foreign energies of Shellshock's spell. It should only be a matter of minutes before the effect ends on its own. If we had the time, we could use the Diandra flower to speed up the process. Zordon mused, talking things out to himself. It is a rare flower with powerful curative properties that could help break Shellshock's spell. But something tells me that it's a bit outside of our reach at the moment, Zordon. Harry snapped. Do you have any quicker solutions we could try? Shellshock seemed to be calming down, and he was now taunting the Rangers in their paralyzed Megazord. There is one other option at the moment, Harry. Zordon said after another moment. The other Rangers are trapped in the Megazord and Tommy is just as helpless as you with the Dragonzord frozen as well, but you could always try summoning your Zord. Harry paused for a moment, shocked at the concept Zordon had just introduced. Wait a second, I have a Zord too. Of course you do, Harry. Zordon sounded slightly amused despite the tense situation. All Power Rangers have Zords, you just have to summon yours and use it to hold off Shellshock until the Megazord and Dragonzord break through. Shellshock's spell on their own. It is only a matter of buying some more time. Alright, Zordon. Harry was panicking himself now, seeing Shellshock drawing its head back to produce its cannon. Just tell me how to do it and I'll give it a shot. It will be just like when you first morphed, Harry. Zordon spoke calmly. Let the power guide you and you will know what to do. Right, the first rule to actively using the power, let the power guide you. With a deep breath, Harry forced himself to relax as best he could and once more drew on the power within him. Just as with his counterspells, he impressed a simple longing on the power, I need to call my Zord. Once again, Harry began moving as the warmth of the power began flowing through him more and more rapidly. Flipping his staff once before passing it to his left hand, Harry's deep purple aura exploded into life around him. Extending his right hand over his head with his fingers spread wide, he began to speak. Silence in the night. Spirit of an old friend. Power of the resurrection stone. I call you forth, Silver Owl Zord. Hedwig. Wait, what? For Harry, everything froze as the words he had just spoken, guided as he was by the morphing grid's power, finally registered in his brain. Could it be possible? Or was this just some odd tribute by the grid to what Harry had lost before coming here? Time started once more when he took note of the giant Shellshock with its cannon once more protruding from its shell and pointed at the down Zords. "It's over for you, Rangers," the monster taunted as a slight glow began to emanate from the end of the cannon. "I'm giving this one my full power. There's no way you can survive." "Harry." Trini's voice came from his communicator. "Do something. Please." Harry was still frozen in place, held by the ever-growing river of power flowing through him with the Magi staff in his left hand and his right extended into the air over his head. Finally, after a mere handful of seconds that felt like hours for all of the Rangers, Harry felt the power that had been growing within him finally release itself in a burst. Harry at once found himself both able to move freely and so weak that he immediately used this freedom of movement to collapse to one knee, tightly gripping his staff as he went down. Before Harry, or any of the other Rangers, could react further, the air was split with a crack of thunder as a bright, multicolored vortex appeared high above Angel Grove. From within this vortex, which had somehow caught the attention of Shellshock despite the fact that its head was currently replaced by a massive gun and thus delayed the defeat of the Rangers by a few more seconds, came a screeching sound that was both hauntingly familiar to Harry and strangely mechanical at the same time. Before the drained wizard could further contemplate the mysteries of the situation, a bright flash of silver-white light emanated from the vortex and a large shape came flying out of it at high speeds. As the vortex closed without a sound, the shape resolved itself into that of a bird of some kind, though before Harry could identify much more about it than that and the fact that it was largely a metallic silver in color, it released another of those hauntingly familiar screeches and plowed into Shellshock, talons first. The sheer entry speed of what had to be Harry's Zord was enough that even though it was rather smaller than the turtle monster, it was still able to knock it backwards just before it could fire its cannon, the resulting streak of red energy lancing upward through the clouds overhead and harmlessly into space. What was that? Shellshock roared as it struggled to roll off of its shell, succeeding after a few moments and climbing back to its feet, its turtle head replacing the cannon as it stood, bat still clenched tightly in its clawed hand. The Zord had completed a vertical loop by this time and now hovered several blocks away, comparably 20 or so feet, with the giant sizes involved in front of the still frozen forms of the Megazord and Dragonzord, its wings flapping much too slowly to realistically provide lift as it glared at the monster with a yellow pane of glass it had in place of the eye Harry could see. Now that it wasn't moving so fast as to only appear as a blur, Harry was able to study the machine from his kneeling position. It was, as he had previously noted, largely a metallic silver in color, though there were a few spots on its chest that were darker gray or black. Its body seemed mostly sharp angles and smooth planes, occasionally interrupted by a feather design, particularly near a joint or the neck, unlike the other Rangers' Zords with their general lack of detail. Its legs hung about half its torso length below it and just in front of its tail feathers, talons idly clenching and unclenching with each slow flap of its wings. From each side, just outside where the legs protruded from the body, were the only, as far as Harry could see at the moment, non-avian-like feature on it. What looked like two sets of two long tube-like structures stretched down just over half the length of the legs, angled out slightly and serving no easily discernible purpose to the wizard. The wings themselves, aside from having an actual feather pattern, appeared to have some kind of fan or turbine about midway down their length, the top of each circular fan resting just below where the bones would have been in an actual bird. The center of the currently spinning fans appeared almost crystalline and glowed internally with a deep purple light. That same purple light also shone from a smooth dome atop its head, though it seemed focused on a tiny point at the very top as opposed to coming from within. The dome then merged almost seamlessly with the sides of the Zord's head as it sloped down into the neck, its beak protruded from the center of its face, occasionally opening and closing sharply and making a clacking noise each time that echoed over the area. Overall, the machine was just under half the size of the Megazord, perhaps 4 or 5 stories tall if Harry had to guess, though since it had a wingspan nearly twice that height it appeared much bigger. As Harry, Tommy, Shellshock, and the Rangers still trapped in the Megazord watched, the Owlzord's head spun clockwise a full 360, revealing that the yellow glass plate for its right eye took up that entire side of its face. When the left eye passed over Harry's location atop one of Angel Grove's skyscrapers, the turning head paused for a fraction of a second and Harry felt a purely internal magical snap as something connected to his mind. Harry/Wizard, the familiar voice of Harry's oldest companion, rang through his mind with a tone of happiness and contentment. "I told you that I would always be with you if you knew where to look." Harry nearly completed his fall, his body growing so weak from shock that he barely caught himself before face-planting into the rooftop. How could it be possible that this machine could speak with the same voice of his dead familiar? Was this some kind of trick? A mockery of Hedwig fashioned by the grid from his memories from his old world? Was it possible that this machine really was Hedwig? Talking later, Harry/Wizard, the voice spoke once more. "Now I must stop Not Turtle from hurting your friends." By this time, Shellshock had recovered from his surprise. "So," it drawled. "Another little machine for me to destroy. And this one flies. That may make things a bit more sporting." Shellshock pulled its left arm into its shell and brought it back out moments later holding a baseball of all things. Idly tossing it into the air, the monster swung its bat and knocked the ball toward Hedwig with a loud crack. As the ball flew toward the Zord, it started glowing brightly before one ball became 2, then 2 became 4. Mere moments later there were dozens of giant baseballs flying toward the still hovering Zord that seemed to have no concern at all. As it turned out, the lack of concern was rather appropriate as the ball merely clunked off of its metal body, doing little to no damage in the end. Hedwig spun her head around again, stopping with her eye angled slightly toward him. "Should I respond, Harry/Wizard?" "Huh?" Harry said aloud, still rather stunned at his apparent situation. "Should I attack Not Turtle, or only stop it from hurting your friends?" "I guess so," Harry answered, not sure himself if his response was a question or a statement. Hedwig clacked her beak a few times, a move Harry recognized from his old world when his familiar was slightly annoyed with her human. Mere moments later, she reoriented fully on Shellshock as the turbines in her wings began to hum as they started spinning faster. "Very well then." Shellshock spoke again, apparently unconcerned with the lack of damage caused by his previous attack. You want to play, little birdie? Taking a step closer to Hedwig, it brandished the baseball bat once more in its right hand while retracting its left only to push it back out with a large pirate's hook on it moments later. Then let's play. By this point, the turbines were spinning so fast that it was impossible to make out the individual blades. The wind started picking up and Hedwig's wings were flapping slightly faster now, kicking up even more wind and dust on each down thrust. Finally, just as Shellshock started to charge forward, Hedwig let out another of her vicious hunting screeches and the tubes by her legs lit up abruptly, revealing their purpose as thruster of some kind and launching Hedwig up into the air at speeds rivaling those of her initial arrival. After a deceptively lazy loop, Hedwig came back down toward Shellshock in a stoop, talons forward, wings back, and a fierce light coming from within her metallic yellow eye. The two titanic forms slammed together with a loud crash, knocking the turtle once more onto its back. The resulting shockwave broke several windows on nearby buildings and nearly knocked Harry flat once again as dust rose around the struggling figures. As effective as the tactic had been at knocking the monster down, as a bird, Hedwig was not exactly built for prolonged close combat with a larger opponent. This was proven as Shellshock was able to wrench itself free from Hedwig's talons and launch the Owlzord off of itself with a powerful kick. Hedwig managed to right herself in the air with a little trouble, but it took long enough for the monster to roll off its back once more and take a kneeling position that she was fully in control before it attacked again. "Let's see how you like this one," Shellshock shouted as the red light on its stoplight lit up once again. "Hedwig!" Harry shouted both mentally and aloud as he struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his staff. "Don't let that beam hit you. It'll freeze you just like it did to the others." "Of course, Harry/Wizard," Hedwig replied calmly even as Shellshock's attack lanced toward her. With an almost negligent beat of her wings, Hedwig easily dodged the attack, as well as the next several that were sent her way. "Let us see how Not Turtle does without this strange light stick," Hedwig commented just before her rockets lit up again, sending her up and out of the way of another beam before she folded her wings back and dove down toward the monster. This time, when Hedwig hit Shellshock, she wrapped her talons around the light pole where it was sticking out of its shell. As her momentum carried her forward, and without the bulk of the turtle monster to negate her speed, the pole broke off with a wrenching snap in her iron grip. Shellshock screamed out in either pain or rage and began flailing its arms around, trying to hit Hedwig, who was still bleeding off her excess speed with the monster's traffic light clenched tightly in her talons. "Gimme back my light," the monster roared, throwing its bat at Hedwig, an attack she dodged with an almost negligent shift of her wings and what would probably have been a scathing glance if her eyes hadn't been mechanical. Harry felt Hedwig's mental shrug and a sense of mischief before hearing her speak. "Okay, Not Turtle wants its light stick back, then I will give it back." In an instant, Hedwig folded her wings again, dropping out of the sky like a stone before flaring them just in front of Shellshock. The momentum of her drop was largely negated for her, but the traffic light in her claws kept it all as she released it to crash into the monster, the glass in the lights shattering on impact accompanied by several metallic clangs. It was a few moments later, as Shellshock rose to its feet again still complaining, that Harry realized that the metallic clangs weren't coming from Shellshock. Turning back toward the now clearly unfrozen Zords, Harry watched as the Megazord finished disassembling into the individual component Zords before the Dragonzord began transforming. The Zord's arms snaked back into its torso as the center of its body lifted away and the sides folded together over the gap to form a sort of armored chest plate. At the same time, the Triceratops and Saber-toothed Tiger Zords changed into the same form they did for the Megazord, only to attach to the legs of the Dragonzord, while the Mastodon did the same, becoming the back and arms of this new mechanical combination. Finally, the Dragonzord's tail detached, the bulk of it retracting into itself to form a pole and then connecting with the detached Dragonzord chest piece to form a drill-tipped spear that settled into the right hand of the machine, while the Dragonzord's mouth opened fully, revealing a blank, yet somehow stern face on the lower jaw. From Harry's communicator, he heard Jason and the other Rangers chanting together. "Dragonzord, battle mode. Power up." Before Shellshock could react, the drill on the tip of the Zord's spear began spinning furiously, lightning crackling around it as the Dragonzord in battle mode charged forward, driving the weapon through the turtle and leaving a sparking hole. While Harry watched and Hedwig hovered once more overhead, the mighty machine turned away from Shellshock as it fell backward, exploding mere moments after it hit the ground. "Well," Harry commented idly as the machine seemed to pose for a moment before it started disassembling again. That almost seemed anticlimactic. Harry's thoughts were interrupted as he heard the soft whine of Hedwig's wing turbines when not prepped for battle, a sound he had missed before because of the distance, as the Zord floated closer. The wizard found himself struggling to stand as the wind buffeted him fiercely. Only moments later, the wind began lessening. A quick glance up revealed that the once building-sized owl robot was now shrinking, only being the size of a semi-truck now. And now just a compact car. And now the size of a regular snowy owl. As the robot flew closer, now flapping its wings as a regular owl might, Harry lifted his left arm on instinct, catching Hedwig as she landed on his forearm and bringing her down so he could meet her eye to eye. There was no real change in her appearance besides size, though he could now see an all-too-familiar shiny black stone perched at the peak of the dome atop her head. In retrospect, he did call on the power of the resurrection stone when he summoned her, so it only made sense that the stone itself would be around somewhere. "Are you uninjured, Harry/Wizard?" Hedwig's soft voice echoed through his mind, bringing feelings of warmth and familiarity he had once enjoyed during his time at Hogwarts. "How is this possible?" Harry murmured, dismissing the Magi staff as he brought his right hand up to idly slide the metal plate of Hedwig's chest. "You don't look like you, but you sound and feel like you. I just don't. How is this possible? You were dead and now." Hedwig clacked her beak once before letting out a soft bark of impatience. "Questions later, Harry/Wizard. Answer me now. Are you uninjured?" Harry chuckled ruefully. She even acted like Hedwig had back in his world, pushy and as stubborn as he was. Yes, I'm all right. Just a bit worn out." "Harry." Harry turned around, slowly so as to avoid disturbing the now comparatively tiny Zord he was carrying and in accordance with his own weakness, and saw the other 6 Rangers approaching him. "Are you all right?" Tommy asked first, his helmeted gaze switching between Harry's own helmet and the robot perching on his arm. "Is that your Zord?" Harry smiled under his helmet and nodded slightly. "Yes everyone, this is, apparently, Hedwig." "Hedwig?" Kimberly asked, stepping closer and staring intently at the owlbot. "Isn't that the name of your familiar that you said was O?" Harry chuckled and nodded weakly again. "Yeah, O." Further conversation was cut off by Zordon's voice coming from each of their communicators. "Rangers, congratulations on a job well done. If you will all teleport to the command center, I believe that I will be able to explain what has happened." "All right, Zordon," Jason responded immediately. "We're on our way." Lowering his left arm from his mouth plate, Jason glanced around at the others. "All right Rangers, let's teleport back." "Right," the others chorused, even Tommy, before they brought both hands to their belt buckle morphers as one and vanished in their individually colored columns of light. Hedwig's head spun a full circle again. "Bossy Red needs to calm down. Is almost as bad as Red Weasel friend from Hoggy Home." Harry gave a soft snort of laughter before bringing his free hand down to his belt and triggering his own teleportation. As he and Hedwig vanished in a column of purple light, he decided that for the moment, he didn't really care if this was the real Hedwig or not. He was going to try and enjoy this little bit of happy nostalgia while he could. When he rematerialized in the command center, Harry caught sight of the other Rangers already demorphed and looking intently at Zordon. "Welcome back, Rangers." Zordon nodded, happiness and pride dancing in his eyes. "And another congratulations on your victory. Shell Shock was a challenging adversary, despite his origins, but you all dealt with the threat admirably for your first real challenge since the addition of our newest Rangers." "Thanks, Zordon." Jason stepped forward as he spoke for the group. "But, in all honesty, we probably would have been toast if it wasn't for Harry's new Zord." Jason glanced back over his shoulder and nodded, just barely, in Harry's direction before turning back to his mentor. "You said you might be able to explain things about it to us, right?" Zordon nodded before speaking. "Indeed, Jason. I am sure you are all quite confused as to why Harry's owl Zord has shrunk down to its current size and why Harry is referring to it by the name of his old familiar. In truth, Rangers, Harry's old Hedwig and this current one are one and the same through the power of the Resurrection Stone and the actions of the morphing grid." The Morphin Rangers seemed shocked and or confused by the concept, but Harry's mind was racing over the implications. "You mean to tell me that the grid used the stone to somehow return Hedwig to life? That's beyond the power of the stone's magic though. It can only restore an illusion of life, and this is much more than that." He gestured with his free hand to Hedwig, who had turned on his arm and now stood cradled into his chest. Nodding once more, Zordon answered Harry's question/demand with sympathy in his voice. "From what the grid communicated to me when I asked, it felt that your power, based as it is on your own brand of magic, should be influenced as much as possible by your old world. As such, when it came time for it to decide the use for the Resurrection Stone, it used the stone's power, amplified by its own, and called upon the spirit of your old companion to animate the associated Zord." Harry tilted his head down a bit and spoke toward the mechanical owl. "Then what happened, Hedwig? Do you know how you got here?" Hedwig's head turned this way and that with a small whirring noise before coming to a stop, facing backwards so she could face Harry. "I was in the great beyond. Hunting to my pleasure. Much prey to be had. I was happy, but not happy. Harry/Wizard was not there. Then, voice from nowhere called to me. Told me that it could help me reunite with my Harry/Wizard. I knew that Harry/Wizard cannot stay out of trouble without me, so I went. And I was right. Harry/Wizard was about to be squashed by Big Knot Turtle when I got here. Harry/Wizard just cannot stay out of trouble. Harry felt tears building in his eyes at his familiar's words and hugged her to him again. The feeling of her metal skin rubbing against his chest still covered by his ranger suit was different, but the feelings he got from his oldest and dearest friend and companion were the same. Harry? Kimberly asked hesitantly. Are you all right? Harry's head snapped up, wide-eyed under his helmet. He had actually forgotten where he was for a moment. Blushing, he spoke. Sorry, Hedwig was telling me how she got here through our bond. Bond? Tommy asked. You and Zordon have both mentioned something about her being your familiar, but not really what that meant. Is this bond a part of that or something? Harry sighed softly before tilting his head to one side, using occlumency to call up what memories he could of the research that he Hermione had done once Hedwig's status as his familiar had become known. A familiar is sort of like a magic user's destined companion. It's an animal of some kind that is typically in tune with the witch or wizard's own magical wavelength. There are several levels of familiarity though. At the most basic, you get a very dedicated pet who will always love and appreciate you and will live as long as you do. This is the most common form of familiar in my old world. Hermione had a pet cat that was at this level with her. Next up, a closer match brings with it the ability for the familiar to comprehend and react to the emotional state of the bonded magical more than usual. It typically brings with it a magically enhanced intelligence that eventually results in the ability for the familiar to communicate with their bonded telepathically. This communication becomes easier as the bond gets stronger over time and was how Hermione and I realized that Hedwig was more than just my pet post owl during our 3rd year at Hogwarts, which was surprisingly early for such a connection to form seeing as most familiar bonds don't reach that point for nearly a decade after the initial bonding. Higher than that, familiars can help their bonded with certain rituals or complex spell casting, but that typically only happens if the familiar itself is a magical creature, which is frighteningly rare. In one case in history, the familiar bond was so great that the wizard, Merlin himself, was actually nearly twice as magically powerful when he cast spells alongside his familiar, a brown owl named Archimedes. The rangers seemed slightly awestruck, either from the overload of information or the reference to a wizard that they better recognized as a cartoon character. Finally, Zack asked the question on their minds. How strong is your bond with Hedwig? Harry gave an unseen smile at his familiar as he responded. Hedwig and I seem to have peaked at the 2nd level. This could be because she was a regular post owl back then, though I guess there is the possibility that that could change now that she is effectively a techno-magical construct. Billy looked excited as he flicked his gaze between Harry and Hedwig. So you were communicating entirely by thought? Prodigious. Harry chuckled at the Blue Ranger's enthusiasm. Yes, Billy, Hedwig and I were speaking telepathically. She told me that she was in the afterlife when the voice from nowhere told her that it could bring her back to me. Since she was apparently not as happy as she would like there, she agreed and came here to protect me. While the others processed Hedwig's story, Harry found himself leaning back against a computer console, still clutching at Hedwig like a stuffed animal. The owl herself had no problems with this arrangement, as she kept up a near-constant stream of contented, raspy hoots and soft barks while her wizard held her to him just as they had in their old dimension. The other rangers' conversations drifted to various subjects in the next several minutes, but Harry just tuned them out until he felt a hand on his shoulder and glanced up to see Trini. Harry, why haven't you demorphed yet? Her question brought the others' attention back to him again as he froze. Demorph? But if he did, wouldn't Hedwig vanish just as the other Zords did until called to battle? He had just gotten her back, would he really have to give her up again so soon, even if only temporarily? Upon relaying his concerns, Zordon chuckled. Harry, I feel that you may be pleasantly surprised if you were to demorph. Hedwig's presence was, above all else, meant to be a further gift to you by the morphing grid. A little bit of your home world to help settle you in this one. What kind of gift of that nature would only be accessible during high-tension combat situations? Harry eyed the trapped wizard for several seconds, doing what he could to try and judge his truthfulness. It was finally Hedwig that calmed him down. Harry/Wizard, I am not going anywhere. You still need me to take care of you after all. Harry felt his eyes tearing up again and gave a slow nod before, keeping his eyes on his familiar still perched on his left arm, he grasped at the power within him and spoke. Power down. Once the flash of light that came with the demorphing process faded, Harry was thrilled and shocked to see Hedwig still perched on his arm. More than that, she looked like a regular snowy owl again. Whoa, Zack breathed, taking a cautious step closer as he, and the other rangers, watched wide-eyed. Is she fully alive again or what? Harry lifted a shaking hand and stroked Hedwig once again. He closed his eyes as he felt the familiar downy softness of her feathers beneath his touch, but still recognized an unfamiliar hardness just below the surface. Looking into her bright, yellow eyes, he noticed that the right one appeared slightly glazed over, quite similarly to the solid glass plate that covered the right half of her face in her robot form. It was Zordon that answered Zack's question though. Unfortunately, Zack, Hedwig is still a machine in body. Her outward appearance will change whenever she or Harry wills it. In this form, she is more able to stay close to her bonded wizard. A condition she insisted upon from what the grid mentioned. Hedwig clacked her beak sharply, her body bobbing twice in an owlish nod. I must take care of my Harry/wizard. I cannot do that if I cannot blend in. Blend in like this. Fight in other form. Protect Harry/wizard and his friends. Voice from nowhere agree and say it will tell Big Head. Harry let out a bark of laughter at her comment which prompted another round of confused stares from the others. Hedwig said that she got the voice from nowhere to agree to her terms so that she could better protect me and my friends. She always was overprotective. He gave Hedwig a scratch atop her head, which she leaned into with a happy noise. Trini squinted in confusion from her spot still at Harry's side where she had been admiring Hedwig's new form. Voice from nowhere? You mentioned that before. What is it? Harry smiled at her, his happiness and relief overflowing since it appeared he wouldn't be losing his familiar again anytime soon. Hedwig has a rather interesting habit of giving people names. She rarely ever uses someone's given name unless she is especially close to them. In this case, I believe that the voice from nowhere is the consciousness of the morphing grid. It makes sense since the grid didn't really have a physical form when I spoke with it. Hedwig's names are usually either very literal, based on her own experiences or observations, or based on how they treat me specifically. How many people's given names does she use? Jason asked, crossing his arms as he stood watching, curiosity on his face. Harry smiled. To date? 2, Hermione and me. She calls me Harry/wizard and has since we first realized the communication level of our bond. She called Hermione bushy-haired Mione. I'm pretty sure it's because she spoiled Hedwig whenever she needed a letter sent. My other friends back at Hogwarts only ever got affectionate descriptors, like Ron was Red Weasel. My girl here is rather picky about who she gets close to. Turning his attention back to Hedwig, Harry resumed his petting and scratching, much to the owl's happiness. Mere moments later, he was drawn out by another question from Jason. Has she made names for anyone else here yet? Harry thought for a moment before fighting down a chuckle. Well, before we teleported here, she called you Bossy Red. When Jason looked about to protest, Harry cut him off. Hey, she calls them like she sees them. You might get another name later on, but her first impression of you was you ordering the team to teleport back here. When Jason merely continued staring, a slight pout on his face if Harry was any judge, he continued. She also called Zordon Big Head just a little bit ago. His comment brought chuckles from the Rangers, save Jason, and even Zordon himself laughed a bit. Alpha seemed less amused. Big Head? How disrespectful. Ai. Hedwig flared her wings briefly and Harry instinctively lifted the arm she was perched on, giving her a bit of extra oomph that let her take flight more easily. Moving through the air silently as only owls can, she glided over to Alpha and landed somewhat unsteadily on Alpha's smooth saucer head. Then she abruptly leaned down and pecked him sharply with a metallic ting. Metalman needs to mind his own business. I will call people what I want to call them and as long as Harry/wizard does not mind there is nothing Metalman can do about it. Tell them, Harry/wizard. Chuckling again, Harry relayed her message. She says that she'll call people what she wants to, Alpha. And she has dubbed you Metalman. In all honesty, I'm the only one who can hear her so you probably don't need to worry about it. Bobbing her body in another nod, Hedwig took flight once again, with a bit more trouble this time since she didn't get a boost from Alpha, and perched herself on the top of one of the computer consoles and tucked her head under her wing. I must rest now, Harry/wizard. Travel here and fighting Not Turtle made me tired. Big Head has more information for you. We will talk more later. Harry turned to the others, who had all followed Hedwig's flight and now turned to him. She's resting. Apparently shell shock wiped her out a bit. She also said that Zordon has more info for me. Indeed, Harry. Zordon spoke, his face more serious now. As you may have noticed, you felt a great weakness when you first called upon your Zord. This is largely the result of summoning it into being for the first time, but it will still be present should you once again call upon Hedwig's power in the future, just not as severe. Your Zord is much like the Dragon Zord in that she draws upon your own personal power to fuel herself. Always keep this in mind, for if you try to call her into action while you are tired yourself, the results could be disastrous. Doubly so since your power as a wizard is more closely linked to you than Tommy's is to him. I will, Zordon, thank you. Harry nodded. His happiness high was leveling out, but he still couldn't help but take an occasional glance toward Hedwig and smile all over again. So, now what? The Rangers glanced at each other for a few moments before a large smile split Zach's face. Well, he said. We could always head back to the park for some more b-ball. Harry groaned internally as the other Rangers seemed all right with the idea before a thought struck him. But didn't shell shock destroy the basketball before we started fighting him? For an instant, Harry felt hope blossom in his chest at the possibility of not being forced to endure Zach's amazing basketball skills any further that day. But then Zach scoffed and Harry felt his hope die. Maybe so, but I have a few extra at home. I'll just port back there first and pick one up and meet you guys at the court. Sound good? Seeing the others nod, Harry couldn't help but follow their example. He did enjoy spending time with the Rangers, but he was not at all interested in playing anymore. All right, but I absolutely refuse to play myself. I think I've had enough of basketball for quite a while. The others laughed as Harry idly rubbed at the phantom pains in his cheek where the ball had smacked him during the putty battle earlier. Zach stepped up next to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry, wizard who ain't got game, I'll protect you from the big, scary basketball. Harry's hand snapped around to his back pocket and grabbed his wand, but before he could bring it around toward Zach, the Ranger had already teleported away and there was nothing for Harry to do but replace his wand and follow the others to the park. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 7. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and 10-star 12 on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video, till then goodbye.